Okay, let's get started. So I no longer do a little intro to each conversation. So we just start with a conversation. So I'm very happy to have you here, Tayan.
I'm glad to be here.
Been an interesting journey to get you here. Just for the audience to know, the reason why, or the reason how I found out about Tayan originally was because, and also for Tayan to know. So basically, I have a small YouTube channel, and what we discuss on the channel is mostly this concept, the term I really don't like, called biohacking. Basically, I don't like it because it's trendy, but it is apt. What it means is like changing your biology through lifestyle or molecules or different things like that. Something I've been doing myself for almost 2 decades, and now I'm personally more interested in longevity as well as feeling better with age, as well as protecting my brain and maybe improving my mental well-being. But before, I used to be a weightlifter and I used to be an arm wrestler. And since 2003 or so, I was involved in the steroid message boards online and was very much involved in that. So because of that reason, a lot of my viewers are bodybuilders or people who are interested in PEDs. And so I get a lot of questions about DECA only cycles. And these took me by surprise. Actually, I didn't originally, when I first heard them, I didn't think much of it. But then I noticed every week I would get a question about this. So I
Mm.
was confused. And eventually, someone who follows my channel and is also on the subreddit, his name is Morning Iron, told me that it was a gentleman named Taeian Clark who popularized this concept. So, of course, I wanted to get you on the podcast, and we finally have you here. So I'm really grateful for you joining us.
I'm glad to be here.
So, Tayan, before we get into anything else, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I always like to ask my interviewees a little bit about their background.
Yep.
Where'd you grow up?
Ontario, Canada.
Oh, I sense the Canadian accent. Oh,
Did you?
fantastic. And you grew up with a two-family household, siblings? What kind of
um, yeah, kind of. Had a brother, kind of a bad growing up. So you know, not like a normal family growing up.
well, a lot of us were like that as well. And what have you been other than bodybuilding? So, did you go to college? Do you have a normal profession, or you just mostly coaching?
This is my profession full time now for about I don't know, like 8 or so years now. Actually,
Well,
ever
fantastic.
since the GH15 forums. Actually, yeah. So it doesn't feel like that long, but yeah, it's actually been that long.
Before we get into that a second, I just want to, you have the most unusual name. In fact, I tried to Google to find out the etymology of your name and I failed, which is very unusual. So I wanted to know, where did your name come from?
So that's not my real name.
Oh, okay.
Back when I was, I don't know, probably 14, 15, I used to play a game with my best friend and my brother. And that was the mythical name that I used of the character. And then when I started getting onto forums, you're trying to come up with an idea for a forum because I started researching about anabolics around like 15, 16. And I'm like, I'm going to use this name. Um, and then the reason that came about when it became popular, I used it on GH15 forums. I just kept using it throughout the years. And then, everybody started calling me Tian. And then when I made my Facebook, it was like, well, I'm going to use a name that everybody's going to be able to find me, that they know me from the forums. And so I just kept with that. So it's kind of my internet alias.
I got it. Like dog crap for Dante Trudell. Excellent. Yeah. So we both actually, how old are you, if I might ask?
32 now.
Okay, wow, we're the same age, and we
Uh,
both got into the forums at the same age as well. I was must have been 15 as well, but I was on different forums with different names. Okay, so I wanted to ask you, so so you started, it must have been very early. When did you get into bodybuilding? What were you interested? What inspired your interest in bodybuilding before PEDs?
it's hard to say what inspired it. I feel like a lot of people, it's multi-factor. Like, let's say watching it like as a kid, an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie or Jean-Claude Van Damme, right? Or you know what I mean, cartoons or anything. I feel like it was just all things like that got me interested in it. And then I remember when I was 14 years old, when I got my first dumbbells, I just did bicep curls, didn't know what I was doing. You know what I mean? It wasn't until about 16 when I started to get into a little more serious, learning a little bit more about eating and training. And that's kind of when it semi started. I was still doing things very wrong though.
I see. So what I noticed is that a lot of us that got into weightlifting early did it to develop like an I mean, there's a couple of ways to think about it. One is to develop an exterior that's strong to protect you from the world. and another way is to better yourself. Like for me personally, I was very into X-Men comics when I was a child. So I used to read about these superheroes, and they inspired me, and I wanted to become, in my own mind, some kind of superhero. Later on, when I got into philosophy, I found out there's a lot of depth to this, actually. Like, for example, the Superman character is really derived of Nietzsche's Übermensch, which is a philosophical concept. Übermensch means the overman. So there's some, there's some basis to this. It's not just a childish thing. But anyway, I was going to ask you, so a couple of things. Well, so before we get into the PEDs and the forum stuff, I wanted to know, were you ever competitive, or you're like just not so much into competing on stage?
No, I burnt out all my years in the beginning doing things wrong. So about 17 was when I did my first cycle. And, it went well, but, diet still wasn't, I still didn't, nobody knows that young usually, right? And I spent probably from 17 to my early 20s trying to go so hard, but still doing it wrong, and, seeing just very modest results. And then that's when I basically burnt out. And basically from my early 20s, I never got that big, because I burnt myself out. And then over the course of the years, I was basically off. You know what I mean? I had a break where I was off for 2 years, and I'd run maybe a small 6-week cycle. But where I got all my size prior was basically in my mid to later 20s, where I ran just a couple cycles, and then, I'd shoot up and I got some decent size. But yeah, it was literally, I'd run a 6-week cycle. I'd be so pumped and ready to get into it. But after that 6 weeks, I was just so burnt out with it, I guess, from all the other years. I'd gain, and then I'd stop the gym. I'd stop everything for about a year, and then hop on again. So like literally the past 10 years has just been like a couple cycles, because I'm just, not there for it anymore.
I know that feeling, absolutely. So tell me about your experience on the forums. What were the forums you used to frequent? Now, I don't want to talk about GH15 yet, because I'm very interested in that. I want to ask you more details about that. But before that, were you on Anabolic Minds? Were you on an Anabolic Muscle? Were you on bodybuilding.com? Where were you frequenting, and what were your favorite boards?
I'll tell you, I was on just about every single steroid you could find, even ones like UK Muscle, whatever it's called, like all across the world. I'll tell you, I was on about every single one, but not every single one did I have an account on. I'm sure you were the same. You just browsed. I really didn't frequent any forums as like a poster until GH15. I just browsed. I maybe had an account and posted here and there and other ones, but that was about it.
Yeah, that's how I was too. I didn't post much, especially because I was reading for years and years before I ever did anything myself. So I didn't really have although I do think that I started the first over 10-page thread on the internet about Trenbolone, actually. Now looking back, but I didn't know anything about. I was just curious because I really was interested in strength, and I kept hearing that Trenbolone helped with strength, and nobody was talking about it online at the time. So okay, so GH15 started. Let's get into that. So by the time the GH15 started, I had been off the forums for 5 years or more, but I heard about GH15, and by the time I heard about him, the Bible was out, and the GH15.org had been invitation only at the time when I first heard about it. Were you on Get Big and knew about GH15 then, or were you invited to the private board, or?
Yeah, I was on Get Big when GH15 started coming around, and he just started saying, oh no, I'm a pro, and everybody just started following him, and then he made a forum out of nowhere, and then I got in on the private forum.
Oh, so you were there from the beginning.
Yeah.
So okay, so let's talk about this briefly. So I wanted to know so a lot of people ask me my ideas or my opinion on who GH15 was. Was it more than one person? I'm sure you must get asked this much more than I do. So I'm curious, what are your opinions on that? Do you think it was, before I say my opinion, was it 4 or 5 people? Was the first person really a pro? Some people claim he was like a steroid dealer. What do you think?
So about the time GH15 went missing, I'm not sure if you remember, he went missing for a little bit. I was actually a mod on the forum. I'm not sure if you knew that.
No.
So I was a mod, and the mods had their own group, little group chat aside from GH15 as well. And it was around the time GH15 started losing credibility. Around the time people were saying, no, he's just a nobody, this and that. I forget who it was, admin or something like that. I told one of the mods that GH15's IP address was in this particular area. and GH15 apparently went missing around the same time. He used to promote this one lab on the forums all the time. It's the best lab ever. Supplies to pros. I think it was Strango or something. I don't remember. He used to promote the hell out of this lab. And around the time GH15 went missing, like a week or so later, that person actually had got busted. And so it kind of for a little bit confirmed that that might have been him. And so if that is the truth, the guy would just look like your average gym rat. If that's who it was. I'm not saying it was, but that's what the other mods were discussing.
Fascinating. Do you remember which year this was that he disappeared?
Oh God.
Was it like 2008 or 2012?
I honestly couldn't tell you. It was at least a few years into the forums. So yeah, at least a couple, maybe a good 3 years into the forums.
Oh, this is really fascinating. So a lot of people thought it was NASA, which you don't think it's NASA.
Well, I don't think so. Due to mainly the IP address thing, and I think NASA was deceased by that time, but I can't fully remember. And it was just too weird of a coincidence for him to be promoting the hell out of this lab, saying you're so lucky if you get this lab. Every pro uses it and everything else, and then he disappears out of nowhere, and that lab goes down. It was kind of strange.
Was GH15 always promoting that lab, or was it only after he started the private board?
Well, only after he started the private forum. You never heard him say this on other forums.
But then after this happened, he had like a Turkish connection. Like you could order from Turkey through the website.
I don't even know. Yeah, I don't think I was on the forum by that time. I left a couple of years after.
Oh, interesting. Well, this is really fascinating information. I had no idea about this. But a lot of the things that he talked about were pretty reasonable. I mean, a lot of them were realistic. The emphasis on Trenbolone was quite accurate. A lot of and it was. I felt like in the beginning it was somewhat consistent, his posts, and then they became less and less consistent over time. Did you notice that also?
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah. Kind of started going all over the place.
So how did you on the GH15 board? How did you start to develop like a reputation for yourself? You became a moderator. Just for the audience that don't know, there's a very like ardent following of Taeian. They call them, I think, the camel either group or cult. I don't know if it's called a cult. Is it called the camel cult?
Camel cult or the talking camel.
And cult is not a bad word, guys. Just for you guys to know, cult is the same origin of the word culture or cultivate. So it's not necessarily a bad word. But so tell me, how did that all begin? What was it about your post that made people interested?
So I'd see people post like a random health issue or just random things like that, and I'll post my suggestion to them, and then one or two people started using it. I say, oh, I got hemorrhoids. I'd say, try some cayenne pepper to cure it in 1 to 3 days. Because, usually people have like a couple weeks of hemorrhoids. I'd be like, try this. Next thing you know, the guy's posting the next day, his hemorrhoids gone. Other issues pop up. I keep posting and people seeing instant and amazing results that they normally wouldn't. And then anytime somebody had mainly a health related issue, they would say, ask the talking camel, because on GH15 forum, my avatar was a picture of a camel head. So the talking camel, that's basically how everything started.
And how did you teach yourself these remedies? Were you a researcher? You were spending a lot of time online researching for yourself?
Yeah, a lot of time online researching myself, because I had a fair bit of digestive issues. And then the more I read into digestive issues, it kept spiraling. Like I would spend, and I still do, I would sometimes like lay in bed for like 12 hours a day just reading and reading, because I'd get on that good track. Like, let's say I'm reading about digestion and too low of cortisol. Cortisol is needed for your your stomach acid production. It's needed to help utilize protein, carbs, and fats. So I'd start reading on that. I read on cortisol and be like, okay, so what's all linked to cortisol? Oh, look, potassium directly raises cortisol. This nutrient, that nutrient. And it was just like this massive spiraling over the years of like every single nutrient related to health and just everything possible. And I just kept going and going, like literally every single vitamin, mineral, or this food does that. And it just kept spiraling for years.
So your main focus was actually on health as opposed to performance.
Yeah, on the forums. Yeah, it wasn't until I made a Facebook account that the PEDs started coming into it more big time.
Oh, really? Okay. So how did you, so you, by the way, why did you decide to do it on Facebook? I mean, I was just thinking myself, the reason why I thought of opening a Facebook was actually to respond to you because I didn't know how to, originally Morning Iron told me, message him on Facebook. I don't have a Facebook. So I thought, should I open a Facebook? And I asked the people that are following me and they said, no one's on Facebook. Don't join Facebook. So why do you decide to open your, instead of having a private message board, for example?
Well, this was about eight, I'm so bad with keeping track of dates. This could have maybe been about 8 or 10 years ago. So that was when Facebook was the thing to do. Like, Instagram, it might have not have been out or it was very dead yet. Facebook was the place to be. So that's why I started on Facebook.
And you have, how does it work there? Do you have like a private group? You invite people into it?
I have a private group and I do have a website with a private forum. But most people who join the website, they end up getting the package where they join the forum. So yeah, it's mainly the private Facebook group.
Okay. How big, out of curiosity, is the community on the Facebook group?
A bit over 700, but there's a few thousand requests though.
Wow.
But when the group started to get too big, I'm answering all these, I would spend all day just answering question. And I literally spent all day replying to people. And that was the point where it's like, this is taking my time. I'm not letting in any more people because, everybody has to get paid for their time, especially when you spend all day. That was when I decided to cut off the request and make it strictly paid for because it was with 700 people, it's too hard to keep up with the questions. And I'm not going to let in a few thousand more that I'm literally going to spend every second on to, not get any other work done.
Yeah, this is an interesting concept. I've seen, I mean, I haven't researched your situation that much, but I've seen someone link me a forum where people were complaining that you charge for your advice, which I find really bizarre. For people who are listening to this, if somebody is, I think every coach or consultant likes to consult. We generally enjoy it. You just can't answer everyone's questions because there's too many people. And then at one point, it becomes a little offensive when somebody sends you a long text asking a very particular thing about them. They're not even asking sometimes publicly, so others can't benefit. And then you have a consultation service, but they don't want to pay for it, which is how, for example, for me, I have a strategy consulting business, which is a completely separate thing. Anytime I spend on this, I take away from that. And eventually I'd like to do only this, but you can't do it for free. Otherwise you're not going to live. So it's really ridiculous.
Oh, I know that's the thing. I don't think people understand when there's thousands or even hundreds of people asking you questions. It's like like you said, sometimes it's an in-depth question, but even if it's not, even if it's a one-word reply, you're replying to 100 people or more a day. And when do you have time to make your money and have your living? It's like, no, you're not supposed to have a living apparently.
Yeah.
But yeah, and anybody who knows me, like they will see, like I 9 times out of 10 I'll reply to everyone's message for free too. I still do that. I just keep going. I don't know, I'm just into, but certain people I'll be like, like, no, I need a break. And yeah, majority of the people, I'm surprised people say that because almost everybody says Tian gives us so much info for free and stuff like that. So I find that funny. But yeah.
I know, this is really odd. That's what I've seen on your website. You have articles there as well. It's
Yeah,
not
all
like,
my free.
yeah.
It just you get to ask me questions. Like that's my time.
Exactly. I agree with you. So let me bring up this topic before we get into the details of your opinions and views on different things. There's this gentleman named Victor Black. What is your story with Victor Black? I want to ask you because I saw a little bit of the exchanges. They happened on my Instagram as well. For the
Yeah.
audience to know, you can go. I have a post about questions for Taeian Clark, and you can see the exchange underneath. It's very bizarre. So I want to ask you, what is the deal with that?
Don't remember exactly where it started, but one of my bits of advice, he started. I forget what he started doing. He just started attacking it, and then the way he attacks it would either be with his own like personal evidence or whatnot, or example the studies. I think maybe one of them was on deca and heart disease, right? And I think it was an animal study. I can't remember. Um, and I remember I tried to explain to him, and I'm sending him studies on the petri dish studies and animal studies. They can have some merit, but it doesn't mean it's always going to. Well, I mean, I'm sure it's not always going to be concrete. We see this a million times. You know what I mean? like sheep and cattle, they have what's it called, the they have an estrogen converting enzymes that we don't have. It's in the brain and in the liver, and this, they get extra growth hormone production from estrogen converting hormones, and people link studies showing that, oh look, this has so much IGF-1 producing blah 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 blah. And then they don't realize that we don't have that specific enzyme, and that's why the results on humans aren't the same. And so when people try and correlate animal studies to human studies, it's like some of it might be correct, but not all of it. And same with petri dish studies like that; it doesn't always come out the same. So I started posting studies proving what he was saying was wrong, and then sorry about that.
Basically, you were disproving some of the things he was contradicting you with.
Yeah, so I was posting studies proving him wrong, and the second I posted something that proved him wrong, he blocked me. And then he kept talking about me afterwards, and my followers seen it, so they started posting studies and stuff back to the more anecdotal experience he was posting, proving him wrong. And he just kept blocking people after blocking people. I don't know what's wrong with the guy. He kept going on. He actually made a post about me too. Like literally all I did was show him studies to say, hey, look, what you're saying is incorrect. And then he makes a post about me insulting me, because on that IG post, he actually said, oh, why am I insulting him? But he actually started making personal attacks at me out of nowhere while I'm blocked too. So it was...
Yeah, so actually someone filled me in on this a little bit because I was a little confused, and they told me that basically it seems wherever Taeian goes, Victor Black appears, then confronts him, then blocks him, and then continues going around looking for him. So it's a really interesting situation. It was a little comedic to me, to be honest with you. In the case of my Instagram post, it was that Taeian responded to him, and in one of the messages, Taeian called him a middle-aged man, something like that, which of course is not polite, but that doesn't mean you get crazy about it. So I was not looking at my phone at the time, so he DM'd me with like 15 DMs and said, you're going to lose credibility on your podcast if you have Taeian on the show. You cannot have him on the show. So I got very offended, obviously, because my podcast is not meant to give me credibility, for God's sake. It's meant to, entertain my listeners. Most of my videos are very informative and very well cited, and they're a little boring. So I have a podcast meant to interview interesting people or be a little entertaining, right? And I'm not looking for credibility because I'm not dogmatic. I don't tell people to follow what I say. You know what I mean? So I was really offended, but I was even more offended because how sneaky is it to go and message someone privately and try to censor them, like try to get someone else to not come on the thing. And his excuse was that, sorry if I'm acting a bit weird, I have some tobacco here. I've been using this oral tobacco recently. Since you got disconnected, I put one in. But anyway, so basically he messaged me and asked me to not have you there. And I was thinking, so I responded to him. I said, if he called you middle-aged whatever, call him back something. Don't come here and try to get him off the, I don't understand. And anyway, he said, no, this guy does personal attacks and so on. What was interesting is that I then stopped responding for several hours. And then he sent me another message saying, you know what? You can have him on the show. Have me on the show too, and we'll debate. But no personal attacks. You have to moderate it well. I said, this is crazy. I don't know who you are. And the reason I'm trying to get Taeian on the show is because there's a thing about DECA, which people ask me about all the time. So we want to find out his opinions from the source. So anyway, I thought this was really amusing. This is probably causing you some kind of anxiety because this guy follows you around. But for me, as an outsider, it looks really entertaining.
Well, it's funny because, like I said, I'm surprised he was saying, oh, let me debate him, because like you've seen other people confirm, he blocks me. The only reason I got to see his Instagram post is because that's where I'm not blocked. The middle-aged man comment was because he tried to use his little anecdotal experience here when he said, don't use DECA. Everybody who uses DECA is crazy and off in the head. And then he lists a bunch of very successful bodybuilders. He says, look at Robbie Robinson, Mike Mentzer, this and that. He said, they're all batshit crazy. So it was when he made that remark about, very successful, everybody knows these bodybuilders in the community. Like, that's why I said you're a middle-aged, washed-up bodybuilder, and you're going to insult some of the greatest bodybuilders in the world. I'm like, do you know what I mean? I was playing that on him. Yeah, that's.
Where, out of curiosity, where's his board? Does he post on forums? Is he
I think he has a forum in a Facebook group. I'm pretty sure.
interesting? Okay, so we'll leave that aside for now. That was just a little entertainment for the sake of it. So let's learn about your opinions. Now, I know you were saying you have some opinions on micronutrients. Maybe we should start there. Do you have particular opinions on micronutrients? Like something, just generally, what is unusual about the way you look at things?
So what's unusual is so I'll first start off with I came across studies of showing there was sedentary people, athletes, and so on, and they showed a list of all the nutrient deficiencies, and I was quite shocked that even athletes had something like 60% of their vitamins and minerals were actually like 50% under the RDA or something like that. And then I started adding up people's diets who would come to me. Whenever somebody comes to me for coaching, they're already an athlete, if you want to call them that, bodybuilder. I would add up their diets myself just to confirm it. And every time I did it, I was like, wow, like these people are literally doing what the studies are showing. And that's why I focus so highly on that, because, just more concrete proof that studies and real world experiences that people are depleting so many nutrients. And it's not everybody just focused on protein, carbs, and fats. And that's why I hate if it fits your macros, because there's so many studies. Example, there's studies on women where, because, when you're dieting, you eat less food, you usually end up eating less nutrients too. If you're eating 400 grams of meat and you go down to 200 grams of meat, as a random example, you just lost half your phosphorus, half your everything. So yeah, the study on women was with phosphorus. The women who took phosphorus prevented their metabolism from being shut down. Their T3 didn't go down with their calories going down. So that's why I hate if it fits your macros or just letting your diet fly wherever. I like to suggest specific foods. It's like, no, let's keep all your RDAs up, your phosphorus up, your potassium up, this and that up, because it's going to help you keep losing fat. Or even when you're growing, people, they just eat white rice and meat. There's very little potassium in that. Potassium is one big thing I push. Potassium is needed for proper insulin production, insulin sensitivity, IGF-1 production. It's needed for a whole host of things. So it's like, I like to focus on that. Like you're missing out on so much extra growth. Studies on animals, examples with phosphorus. They showed pigs were the exact same diets, but they add a little more phosphorus to the other group of the pigs, and they saw more muscle growth, more fat loss. So, I hate when people just eat whatever and assume they're getting the best. It's like, no, pick the healthiest, most nutrient-dense foods possible for the best growth, the best fat loss, the best health, and so on.
That's a really good point. I also don't like this macro looking thing. Actually, let's give the audience a little bit of background, because the study of nutrition in general, so around the 1850s or 1860s, sometime around then, they realized that there was such a thing as calories. Once calories came out, then they discovered protein. So this was the first macronutrient. So for a period of time, nutritionists were thinking calories and protein were what mattered. Then they discovered carbohydrates and fats and so on. And so then it became a macronutrient thing. That ended in the 1910s, when vitamins and minerals were beginning to become understood. For some reason, the bodybuilding world is still into this like late 1800 macronutrient thought paradigm, where in reality, a lot of the bodybuilders, like you said, are eating a micronutrient sorry, I can't speak with this tobacco, but micronutrient shallow or not dense foods. And in fact, yesterday I made a video about, it wasn't a negative video, but about Greg Doucette's cookbook. And Greg Doucette uses the word dense all of the time, but he doesn't actually mean micronutrient dense, because a lot of the foods they're having don't have many micronutrients. Like something that's micronutrient dense is like liver, for example. Whereas chicken and rice, especially white rice, is the exact opposite of micronutrient dense. So I can imagine, I can completely see what you're saying in terms of there being vitamin and mineral deficiencies.
And on top of it, the fact that you need so many specific vitamins and minerals that need to be utilized to process that protein, carbs, or fat. So when they're it's like white rice, beriberi disease. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, of course.
What was that? The B1 deficiency. Poor countries who had to thrive off white rice, but got beriberi disease, B1 deficiency, because for every gram of carb, you need so much B1 to process utilized carbs. You need 300 grams of white rice or of carbs from white rice. You're just depleting that B1 until you get that disease. However, the people eating a diet of brown rice that had B1 did not get that disease. So that's the thing, you're eating all these macronutrients, you're not utilizing them all, and you're also depleting so many of your nutrients that is, you're just worsening gains overall. It's doesn't
Yeah,
make
this
sense.
was studied in the Japanese sailors, especially. That's how they discovered the. Yeah, many of these. So basically, a vitamin technically is something that, in its deficiency state, you develop a clear etiology of a disease. So, like rickets or beriberi or, scurvy, for example, for vitamin C. But there are also like complex signaling mechanisms that occur with some of the minerals, right? So,
Yep.
like zinc, for example, affects IGF-1 and things like that. So clearly having enough. And the other thing that you didn't mention also, that people who are on PEDs or very muscular or exercising a lot probably deplete their minerals and vitamins more than normal people do, right?
You too. Yeah, that's 100%.
Interesting. So that's one thing. Now let's talk about the PEDs. So I've heard, before we get into DECA, I've heard that you have some unusual opinions on insulin and growth hormone.
Yeah, sure. Dive right in there. Growth hormone, I'm not a huge fan of. What a lot of pros call it, I copy what they say. It's an expensive fat burner. Like it has its purpose. The water weight you get from GH, you're not going to get from any steroid. Anybody who uses GH, you take GH, you explode about 10 pounds, and a lot of it's in your doubt, and you just look really full. And if you don't use that, you're not going to look as full. It's not muscle, but you're still not going to look as big as possible without GH. Then I wrote an article on it. It was like 27 different, I forget, like a few decades of studies where they did muscle biopsies. Some of them were up to like 28 IU a day of GH. Not a single one of them could show that hyperplasia happened. So that's
Interesting.
why I hate when people suggest GH for that specific purpose. It's never been proven to happen. In insanely mega doses, it's been proven to happen. And then I always use this example. GH in adults will cause your bone and tendons to grow, which is a lot harder tissue, a lot longer process than muscle. Why is it we can mega dose people with GH and have their bones and tendons to grow, but their muscle is not growing? Like when I look at studies, I like to put little cross referencing of this and that, like how is this happening and how is this not happening when I do that. So it's good fat burner, but obviously it has its side effects in high doses, like insulin resistance. And then insulin, I love insulin, but I have my specific types of insulin. Everybody likes to think, oh, insulin is insulin, which is further from the truth. I wrote a big insulin article on this. Example, the insulin Levemir is actually shown to cause weight loss and appetite suppression. Meanwhile, the insulin Lantus, in comparison, showed appetite increase and weight gain. So, they're insulin analogs, right? They're not human insulin. They have vastly different effects, like Lantus, 8 times stronger IGF binding, stronger IGF increase. I think like 30 IU a day, almost doubled IGF-1. So insulin is not insulin. Some is shown countless times to raise your antibodies and worsen your resistance, and then some have been shown to improve your insulin resistance and lower your antibodies. So I mean, yeah, I love insulin. I think it's a great anabolic hormone, and I know people trying to argue, no, insulin isn't anabolic. Here's this in this studies, but people are looking at those studies wrong. Because people say there's no study showing that insulin is anabolic on its own, but it's completely false. There are studies. Trying to remember the reference of this
No,
study to
insulin is anabolic. There's absolutely no question about that. No,
people like to say if you take outside of your body's natural production, it's not anabolic. But no, there's burn. I think it was a burn victim patients where they gave them insulin and their anabolism increased. The amino acids and whatever. So yeah, I hate when people say it's not anabolic.
So I just offer some comments on what you just said. So that it's very interesting. The growth hormone, first of all, obviously, it's well known that growth hormone inhibits the action of insulin at the insulin receptors. So it directly, acutely makes you insulin resistant, which is the problem for bodybuilding. But you said something that I've always been saying, which I think I'm new on YouTube and I haven't had muscle while I was on YouTube, so people don't take me seriously. But
Yeah.
for sure, growth hormone does not grow muscle. Seriously, it does not do that. I've seen it. I've used a lot of growth hormone. In the short term, your muscles get round, especially your delts. You get water retention in a unique way that you don't get from anything else, just like Taeian just said. And you look better in the short term, but it doesn't cause you to grow. It definitely causes some kind of hyperplasia in the body, which is why I always warn people from it, because you see, every cell in the body can only divide a certain number of times, something like 50 times. By the time it gets to that point, it chooses 2 paths. Either the cell dies through apoptosis, or the cell becomes like a zombie cell called a senescent cell. When you take growth hormone, you're basically shortening the lifespan of your cells in your body because they only have so many times they can divide in your lifetime. So from a health perspective, which I'm very interested in, I'm concerned about it. But another thing that you said, which is so true, is that growth hormone does cause bones to grow in adulthood. I've seen evidence of that in papers. I should probably cite it in one of my videos. But I've also experienced it myself. I've noticed some slight bone growth. And I feel like this kind of bone growth, which happens like at the end of your joints mostly, causes some kind of weakness actually. And I have some friends who are top powerlifters, and they tell me that they never gained any strength from growth hormone, even at 30 IUs a day for years. And in fact, some of them feel like they got weaker. So it's really questionable how useful growth hormone is in the long term. Like you said, it's a fat burner because it makes your metabolism. It has to do all the cell division. So, I mean, that's the worst way you want to burn fat. To tell your body to just grow randomly in any direction. Your nose can get wider. You can get horns on your forehead. You can get your head starts splitting up and getting bigger. You know what I mean? That really does happen. So the other thing about insulin is really interesting. I never knew about I've never looked into these different analogs to understand how their pharmacology works. I can
Yeah,
imagine it.
they're all 100% like different. Like you just said, one would increase your appetite, one does the complete opposite effect and decrease it, like, you know, a complete 180. They all have so many different effects. That's why I hate when people say, oh, insulin's insulin. Nope, they're, you know, they're all different.
That's a really good point. I mean, just from my interest in pharmacology, I know that you can change a tiny thing on a molecule and it can act completely differently. It can agonize different receptors. And every molecule acts a little bit differently in the body. So this is something really I should look into myself, even though I'm not interested in performance enhancement in terms of muscle anymore. But that's a very valid point. So which insulins are you fond of?
My favorite is Lantus and Humalog. Humalog for its antibody lowering effects. I would say it's like the most healthiest. In Lantus for the most size, namely because it gives the most appetite. It's the most studied one for appetite that we have, which there isn't much. And then real world experience, it's by far the most appetite boosting one. So for size, that's a massive benefit. And then, like I said, I think it was 30 IU that showed almost a double IGF-1 increase. Don't quote me on that because it's been a while since I read the study. And I noticed in people and myself, in Lantus, it gives the GH look. It exposes shoulders in the traps like you're using GH. So those two are definitely my favorites.
Fascinating. Actually, the IGF-1 itself does not make people insulin resistant. It's pretty interesting. IGF-1 actually could enhance. First of all, IGF-1 acts on the insulin receptors also at like 10 times less affinity, but it also may enhance the activity of insulin. So, and it does make sense that insulin itself would have a downstream. I probably have read this before. Have a downstream effect on IGF-1. So I wanted to ask you about the so-called growth hormone secretagogues or peptides, like GW and those kind of things. What do you think about?
My opinion of them is very short. I don't research a lot of them. I don't like the sides of a lot of them, and the other half I don't research. What am I thinking? The GHRPs, those peptides, those I do like. Just because it's more mimicking of the natural production, and overall I just like it because with GH, a lot of the negatives is from the duration of it, because what is it, 12-hour half-life. There was a study where they did GH every day versus every other day, and they had less insulin resistance, they had less growth hormone receptor resistance, which many people don't know about. So, and I believe the children, they saw better bone growth and better overall effects by doing it every other day versus every day. So that's why it's more like a theory and a personal thought that GHRPs would be overall much more healthier in avoiding some of the GH-related side effects.
Yes, certainly. One of the things that, well, so one interesting thing, I always advise people not to use GW, whatever that number is. It's called what the hell is that thing called? I forgot. Anyway, cardarine. Is it? No, it's not cardarine. It's something else. Anyway, whatever that GW thing is, ipamorelin. That's what it's called. Ipamorelin. Anyway, that thing, it has a very long half-life compared to the GHRPs, which makes it has sustained effects. If you're just trying to get hungry, which was what people are doing a lot of the time, you can get that acute hunger from the GHRP6 or GHRP2 and not have the downstream effects. Although I think that ipamorelin may increase IGF-1 more because the other one is so short acting.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it has the downstream. By the way, you know how these things work, actually? It's really interesting. They work through the ghrelin receptor. They call it the growth hormone secretagogue receptor, but the only reason they call it that is because they discovered ghrelin in 1999, way after they discovered these analogs, which were originally, by the way, developed from something completely different. I can't remember what the chemical was. But anyway, so these GHRP2, 6, and ipamorelin, the GW thing, all work through the hunger hormone, which is a theory I've always noticed when I was a teenager, that people who are skinnier tended to grow taller. Now, this could be, you could think of it two ways. It could be either their growth hormone is making them expend more energy, or they're actually people who eat a little bit less and have more hunger. And turns out ghrelin directly, so ghrelin agonizes a receptor in the pituitary that is similar to the growth hormone receptor, which is this growth hormone secretagogue receptor, or ghrelin receptor, which then causes a growth hormone release. I'm not very fond of them myself. I've never seen much benefit from them. And
Well, if it gives any benefit, or I can't think of the word. Anyways, I'm 6'4", and I was like 140 pounds when I was a teenager. So
really, yeah,
yeah,
that's how it is. That's how I've always noticed. And if you ever notice, the fat kids in school, they don't grow taller usually.
that's usually
Yeah.
yeah.
So I've been thinking about that. So I wanted to ask you, okay, now let's talk about the anabolic steroids. So let's get into the interesting subject of DECA. So how did you end up interested in DECA, and what's the story here?
So okay, this was actually on Get Big forums. I remember. I actually asked GH15 about it too when he was on Get Big forums, because trying to remember how. Okay, this is how it popped in my head. I believe I remember. So I was having the related side effects, like I got gyno from test, and I hate when people say, "Oh no, here's the 600 milligram test study. Test doesn't cause gyno." Yeah, well, there's studies on tests at like 300 milligrams where it caused 75% of men to get nipple tenderness. So I hate when people trying to refute one study. Like, a lot of people do get test sides. I got hair loss, I got gyno and everything like that. And then I remember always reading the old pros use deca-based in or primo and this like that. And I was thinking, okay, they did it back then and they got to amazing size with, you might want to call it shitty diet and training sometimes, if Arnold really trained for like 6 hours, and the carbs, because they said as soon as they added carbs they grew bigger, so their diet was maybe a lot shittier, and they got to that size just deca-based. And I was thinking, so they could do it, why can't I do it to get the that effect? And then I noticed, you look at them, like 99% of them, amazing, great flowing hair, amazing clear skin, no gyno. And I know none of them really use like Novadex or stuff like that till I think the 80s it started becoming a little bit popular. So they were just using all these drugs that is known not to cause those sides, because even in old anabolic books they're talking about like Nandrolone is weak androgenic and estrogenic activity. So I just started putting two and two together. As like, people used to do it. They didn't get sides. I don't want these sides. I'm sorry, but like, you're taking steroids already. That's not healthy for you, no matter what way you put it. Yeah, some are less healthier than others, and so on and so on. And I'm all for doing less, in the sense of I'd rather just use for 6 weeks, call it quits, and you're off for a good while. So my thought was like, okay, so why don't I use this and this that's not going to give me these permanent sides, like the nipple and the hair loss, more vain things, right? Cosmetic. And so it was basically from that, and I just kept researching, and I kept researching, like the HIV studies. Oh, look, nandrolone is used. And then I found Dr. Robert Kerr's book, he's a doctor for many of the California bodybuilders, I believe it was. And he was listing, he listed just basically what they all did. I'm like, this is a doctor prescribing it too, even though, just because he's a doctor doesn't mean he's well versed in whatever. But yeah, I basically looked for studies and stuff like that. And, I put together the fact that, the androgen receptor just needs to be activated for, basically all the gene, whatever, the sorry, my mind's going.
No.
So yeah, you basically are getting all the androgen receptor activation that you would for, whether it's a penile function or, all that. So I was like, why not do this and avoid all the sides? Everybody else did it. Like, why not do it, basically?
So interesting. So I've never tried nandrolone by itself, and I don't use steroids anymore. But people don't have issues performing sexually when they use nandrolone by itself.
So I'll say the real world experience here with this. You can go on any form right now, put test and libido down, test and erectile dysfunction. TRT forums, guys using just TRT in our bodybuilding forums, guys saying the higher they go in test, their dick goes.
Yeah, at some point that does happen if you go too high. Yeah, for
But
sure.
even guys get on TRT and it's not. And then people act like, um, people act like, oh no, tests, won't do that, won't do that. But the people that happens to, I would say the percentage, let's say 1,000 guys are using tests. I would say I've seen more guys have libido issues on tests than DECA, because out of my experience, out of my hundreds and hundreds of followers, clients over the past 8 or 10 years, the amount of libido issues has been like a handful, like let's say 10 out of everybody. Most guys, if you see my forum, like I always post screenshots and people ask, guys saying, and I was one of them too, I take DECA, my libido is through the roof. I want to go at it 6 times a day, way more than tested. That's what a lot of people will say on it. But and again, there'll be like a handful that say, oh, my libido goes down. And what I found, like there'll be like followers, 9 times out of 10, those guys also had libido issues on tests or even natural, and it was all over the place too. So it's like, can't really say that. So majority of the time, I would say DECA is more better for libido on average than test, from my experience, that is.
Is this when it's DECA by itself, or
Yeah.
are you combining it with test?
DECA just by itself, because when I first used DECA, I used it with test, and the worst, limp, whatever. Like, and that's what most people notice, right? And and I always say this: test and DECA is. I warn everybody, it's a bad combo. DECA increases your prolactin sensitivity. It increases aromatase enzyme. I forget at what dose. It can increase it by 20%. So you have the powerhouse creator of a test, which even in studies in HRT showing can put a lot of men at the higher prolactin range for the normal range.
Yeah.
Test is the powerhouse estrogen and prolactin creator. You go and have DECA enhance it. You're using a powerhouse of side drugs.
Fascinating. That could really be true. So just to provide some background evidence for what you're saying. So there is good reason to. So another thing you were saying was hair, right? Not just skin, hair loss. People were experiencing hair loss. So there is actually good reason to think that nandrolone produces less hair loss than testosterone. The reason is this. Testosterone converts to dihydrotestosterone from 5-alpha reductase. But nandrolone also converts through 5-alpha reductase to dihydronandrolone. Dihydronandrolone has less affinity at the androgen receptor than nandrolone does. So when it converts, it doesn't cause more hair loss because it has less agonism of the androgen receptor in the hair. Whereas testosterone, when it converts, it has more agonism in the hair. The other interesting thing is that nandrolone, so there are more 5-alpha reductase enzymes available on the hair and on the prostate than there are in other parts of the body. So basically nandrolone, although it actually has more affinity than testosterone at the androgen receptor generally, the part that really worries people, which is the prostate and the hair, has more 5-alpha reductase. So the nandrolone gets converted into this benign dihydronandrolone there, which is much less powerful than dihydrotestosterone or nandrolone. Whereas testosterone there gets converted to dihydrotestosterone, which is even more, has a stronger affinity for the androgen receptor than testosterone. So this is a really interesting, I was looking into this because, I kept hearing this subject from people that were subscribed to my channel, and I looked into it. And it seems there's very good reason to think the way you're thinking about the effects on the hair and the prostate.
And I'm not sure what else would be protecting it. Maybe it's the progesterone activity of nandrolone, but like I'll have guys that, like TRT, so many guys, TRT is increasing their hair loss. Every single person, because I deal with a lot, and I mean a lot of hair loss sufferers. So I've gotten to put a lot of my preaching into practice, but by experimenting as well.
Mm.
So guys that would get hair loss off TRT or any just low dose, any small like androgenic drug could run grams of DECA, 1 gram, 2 grams, 3 grams, zero hair loss, like no shedding, just nothing. But they add a little bit of test, bam, hair loss. So that is more of like an anecdotal experience, but that is every single time what I've came across.
Well, anecdotal experience is what's most important in the world of PEDs because there aren't that many studies. People like to quote studies. And people like to quote studies that they don't understand. So for example, actually, let me just talk about this for a second, because this is important. So on the post that I mentioned you on Instagram,
Yeah.
someone commented saying that testosterone raises dopamine in the brain. And I found this to be very frustrating, because I spend most of my time studying papers on the brain, not on testosterone, on random other things. But so I'm very interested in cognitive function. This is like my main interest other than longevity. So just for the listeners who are listening to this, I'm sure that a lot of the people who are talking about this will be listening. Dopamine is not one thing in the brain. There's dopamine synthesis, okay, which can be affected. There are enzymes that create dopamine from precursors. Then there is dopamine in the synaptic cleft. So the dopamine transporter removes dopamine from the synaptic cleft. So for example, testosterone increases the activity of the dopamine transporter, which means it takes dopamine out of the synaptic cleft. So you're using less dopamine communication there. There's also dopamine degradation enzymes like monoamine oxidase, which can be affected. So there's a lot of different things. Then there's dopamine receptors. There's dopamine 1, dopamine 2. These receptors can be downregulated or upregulated. Usually they're downregulated if there's more dopamine synthesis, but this is not straightforward. So there are a bunch of studies on dopamine in rodents with testosterone and other androgens, but they don't paint a clear picture. Trust me, I've read all of them, probably. Like I've read at least 30 or 40 of them, and I couldn't say myself that testosterone increases dopamine or doesn't. So when you guys are commenting on the page, says, no, here's one study. Actually, two people did this. They posted one study. That's one study talking about one specific element of dopamine. You can find the opposite. So for example, you might say there's more transmission or less availability of monoamine oxidase A. By the way, there's other degradation enzymes, not just monoamine oxidase A. But there are also studies showing that DAT is more active. If DAT is more active, you have less dopamine in the synaptic cleft. So it's not straightforward. Sorry, that's a little bit of a rant, but I had to say this because it's not, you can't just take an animal study in one particular element and then without understanding the biology of the brain or the body, jump to conclusions. And so the best experience we have is when we talk about how people reacted, because to be honest, there's not that many, and this is the other point that I'm trying to say, there are not that many studies on this in the first place. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you've seen the study I linked to. They had a multiple different steroids, and it showed the lower dose, it showed a decreasage in one area of dopamine, and then the higher dose increase. You know what I mean? It was all over the place. It was
all over the place, and it's different things going on. It's not just it's transmission. It's different doses. It's different. Now, the one thing I'll say, I just want, because people know that I'm not very fond of. Look, I'm not very fond of androgens in general, because for various reasons. But people know that I'm not very fond of synthetic androgens. I just want to say why I'm not very fond of them, because since this is the big discussion on it. The reason I'm not very fond of them is because, okay, so first of all, we should know that most of the studies on synthetic androgens are on nandrolone. Like, that's just because it's the most studied one, okay? So when I've said in previous videos that nandrolone is cytotoxic to many tissues in the body, so is stanozolol, so is oxymethylone, so are most of the other synthetic androgens. Why does testosterone tend to be less cytotoxic? The probable reason is it's also converted to estrogen. So when estrogen has some neuroprotective elements, so in the brain, there's a study that shows that when you add an aromatase inhibitor to testosterone, it is neurotoxic. But when you don't, at a lower and medium dose, it's not neurotoxic, whereas stanozolol or nandrolone or whatever are always neurotoxic. The reason is probably just this conversion to estrogen. Okay, so it's not that testosterone is healthier. Most of these guys that are talking to me are also using aromatase inhibitors. So at that point, you're using an androgen, and it's the affinity at the androgen receptor that causes whatever toxicity we have. You know what I mean?
I meant to link this study to you actually, because I remember you mentioning that. Everybody always mentions this study for what is it? Well, nandrolone being more cytotoxic than testosterone, right? And everybody's always reading the abstract. If they look into it further, they had the what is it, the IC50 dosage for when it becomes whatever 50% of it's yeah. So if you actually look at the graphs, nandrolone had it reached that value at a much lower dose than testosterone. But once testosterone was out of that normal range, it was, testosterone was protective. So let's say your TRT dose in the study, testosterone was protective. The second it was out of TRT dose, and they did doses like 10 milligrams, 50, 100, I forget the exact dosage, right? A graph. Testosterone was protective. Nandrolone was negative for you. However, the second they both went up in doses, the cytotoxicity kept increasing in basically linear fashion, except for nandrolone was still always a little bit more cytotoxic, but by like 5% each dosage. So let's say, you know what I mean? Like they're both at 100 milligrams, nandrolone is killing Test. It's horrible for you, whatever. But the second they both get to 200 milligrams, nandrolone is just 10% worse. The second they get to 300 milligrams, nandrolone again is just 10% worse. So that's a big thing. I feel like people always quote that abstract of the study, but you actually look at the graphs. They did like 4 different steroids too. They're all horrible for you. It's just Test was protective at the TRT dose, which is kind of like, so either way, no matter what you're using androgens, past the normal range, you're going to screw yourself.
Yeah, well, now androgens. So androgens, they agonize multiple receptors in the body, but the agonism of the androgen receptor itself seems to be what causes the toxicity in many tissues. And so nandrolone agonizes the androgen receptor with greater affinity than testosterone does. But this is the benefit, right? It doesn't convert into a worse molecule, which is dihydronandrolone. Does not have a strong affinity. And the 5-alpha reductase enzyme is more present in the prostate and in the scalp. So nandrolone should produce less side effects on the scalp and on the prostate than testosterone. And testosterone converts to estrogen, which should be a little bit protective in some other tissues, especially in, as you said, petri dishes, which is in vitro. So in vitro, if you take a brain cell and put testosterone there and you have the aromatase enzyme, it can convert. Whereas nandrolone has a stronger affinity for the androgen receptor, and it can't convert, so it's going to be more neurotoxic in that sense. But like you just said, all of these things are to some degree toxic, not across all tissue. Like, for example, the kidneys are the main organ in the body that we know androgen affinity causes direct cytotoxicity. For some reason, I mean, if you look at women and men, women don't get kidney failure as often as men, off androgens as well. If you take a lab rat and you what do they call it when you make him a eunuch? You remove his testes, castrate. If you castrate the lab rat, they won't get kidney damage. But if you take a female lab rat and you inject it with androgens, it will get kidney damage. So androgens, there's a lot of studies on this. So if you androgens directly, for some reason, the agonism of the androgen receptor is very harmful to the kidney. So, but this is across the board. Basically, the difference you're experiencing is the protective element of estrogen with Now, by the way, an interesting point is this: if you take finasteride and combine it with deca, you end up with a problem, because then it doesn't convert to this benign thing in the hair, and you get the same. It's still not as bad as dihydrotestosterone, but you still get that affinity at the hair follicles, right? That's very interesting. So what you have guys that use like 2 grams of deca by itself?
So people hear this, and like Victor Black, this is one of the things he was trying to insult me with. When I say things, I hate when people ask me what dosage to use. What dosage to use is up to you. We know studies, more is better to a degree. Like, it's not linear. Like the 600 milligram testosterone study. The lowest group gained 5 pounds. They double it. They gained 10. They doubled it. They gained 17 or whatever. It starts dropping off. And don't quote me on the exact numbers, but that androgen receptor saturation was also, I'm just going to make up these numbers. I don't remember the exact numbers. Let's say you use 300 milligrams and 50% saturated, and then you use 600 milligrams and then only 70% is saturated versus the full 100, right? So androgens really level off on their effects. They don't keep doubling, but we do know that more is better for strength and size and fat loss.
Yeah.
So when people ask me dose, I literally always say this. I say about 300 to 400 is the lowest. You can go lower, but I say this: you're going to put your body in harm and shut yourself down. I would at least want to get a decent effects if I'm going to do that to my body. And then they ask me the maximum dose. I usually say about 3,000, and I base it off of a few animal studies in that testosterone androgen receptor saturation. It doesn't mean 3,000 is going to be that much more benefit, but I say that's maybe where you're fully saturated and you won't see any more growth. But I say on average, like around 1200 is probably as high as you want to go for the most part, where effects just really, really start to level off. So yeah, that my cult is full of guys who use 400 milligrams, the guys who use, one guy used 5,000 milligrams. So it's literally all over.
That's, another thing I forgot to mention is you mentioned the effect on the progesterone receptor. So DECA has 5 times the affinity for the progesterone receptor than testosterone does, which means, and progesterone, when it's agonized, increases the sensitivity. It upregulates estrogen receptors. So this is the science behind how you describe when you combine testosterone and DECA, you might be, I mean, it's only 5 times more. Like there are some other steroids actually that are stronger on the progesterone receptor, but basically the effect should be estrogen receptors are upregulating, so you get more sensitive to the effects of testosterone, which I don't know if they have an effect on prolactin. I assume that the sexual side effects are prolactin, but I don't know much about
Well, are you talking about DECA and prolactin?
no, I'm talking about testosterone prolactin.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, but does DECA have an effect on prolactin that you know about?
This is in my article, my DECA article. I linked the only one we have on humans, where they put humans on either test or DECA, or no, I think they started them off on one and then gave a wash up period and started on the next. The testosterone group, the prolactin raised. The DECA group, it actually dropped.
Interesting.
And through my own experience, guys that are using 400 milligrams or 3,000 milligrams, always low. It's always like 10, 12, 9, always low, no matter what. So
Fascinating. Well, this is a very interesting take on I mean, this is great. I'm very happy that you came on because people have been asking me about this a lot. But we hear about it from the source. There's a lot of rational thought really behind this. To talk briefly a little bit more, you just mentioned Victor Black again. What is his problem with the DECA thing? Just to be clear.
I don't remember because this happened, I think, almost 2-3 years ago.
No,
I think
he was arguing on my Instagram also, but there were too many messages. What's his issue? He thinks that it's just harmful mentally.
I don't even remember what his main issue is. Maybe it's that, but there's a few. And again, like I said, I posted studies, this and that, and look at his arguments. His argument was these bodybuilders that use DECA were batshit crazy. Literally his words. He's like, Mike Mentor, Robbie Robinson, they were batshit crazy. So this kind of tells us that DECA makes you crazy. Like the most insane argument of, you know what I mean, I've ever heard. And that's all he does. So I don't even remember when it started. It was something like that.
Well, androgens do have an effect on the brain. I have for the viewers that don't know, I have a video called "How Testosterone Affects the Brain." You can search on my channel. It's not about the acute effect because the acute effect, as I said before, is very complicated. We can't understand it. But looking at how brains change over time, mainly the main issue is serotonin downregulate. Serotonin is transmitted less, and serotonin receptors downregulate. And you can deal with this by taking something like an SSRI, which I think would be a great companion to any, because that directly affects your serotonin, right? But however it does this, it's going to be through the androgen receptors. And testosterone just has this estrogen protecting it. And it has less of an affinity than nandrolone. But I've always, personally, I always felt like the bodybuilders that I knew that took DECA, but they all took DECA with high testosterone. So I've never met somebody who didn't. But those guys seem to be a bit moody, but it could be that combination, as you were just saying, right? So
my personal experience with this, and people, I always quote this, like people always ask, oh, how do you feel on DECA? And I'll quote them screenshots from people from my group. One second. DECA, this is the best way to explain it. I say it like this, a weird way to say it. DECA makes you feel like what you'd see like the 1950s men from like movies and stuff like that. You're just so like calm and level-headed and kind of cold. Like you're not emotional. Like for me, Tess, that freaking, it made me emotional. I'm on a roller coaster. I'm like one mood, like, jealous or upset or this or that. DECA, like when I use DECA, and this is what like all my guys who use it say, you just feel like as manly as you can, not in like an aggressive way, but in a level-headed way. Like let's say you're having an argument with your spouse. It's like, you don't get heated. You're so calm. You're just like, okay, You know what I mean? You shrug it off. Like it kind of makes you cold to emotion in a sense. That's why I'm saying it's like this very manly thing where things don't bother you. It really makes you kind of cold. And some people dislike that, but majority of people like it in my following because it makes you very level-headed. It's a weird way to explain it.
And do they have to take aromatase inhibitors or not at all?
No, I mean, I think like again, there's always going to be that one outlier, and I always tell people this, like Tony Huge from Enhanced Athlete, he went and did my deca only experiment, right? And he kept upping the dose, and he said he started to get gyno and this and that and this and that, and I'm like, go check your bloods, dudes. Like this isn't normal. What happened? Because so many times deca is faked with tests. Test is cheap, right? He goes and checks his blood, and his estrogen is 10 times higher than normal range. And so that's why I always tell people, if you're having an issue, first check the bloods or test your gear. And yeah, so gyno, guys, I get gyno off less than TRT test, and a lot of my followers do too. Deca, 3 grams or anything, nothing. You're completely fine.
Yeah, so that probably explains why you guys get a calm mood, because you're not having that estrogen effect, which
for sure.
I don't know if anyone listening to this has known somebody on 5 grams of test. I have, certainly pro powerlifters, and they are very moody and very, it's really, it feels very unpleasant, that the way they're experiencing that. Now I sort of regret that I never tried the nandrolone only to know what it would feel like. Which is, by the way, another surprising thing is that you were on GH15 and you weren't that into the trend thing. Did you ever go into the trend rabbit hole?
I see. I'm most famous for my hair loss aspect. I used Tren when I was like 20, 50 milligrams every other day for 1.5 weeks. That's it. When that 1.5 weeks hit, my hair shed into. I had a full, thick head of hair. I used to say online, I was like, I wish my hair would fall out so it wasn't so thick. I remember shaking my hair in the mirror in the bathroom and literally filling up the sink. Every 10 minutes I'd go because I'm like, what the fuck's going on? I'm shaking my hair and it's coming out and coming out. And my temples receded within the next couple months. And that's so bad. I came off for I think a year or more after that. I never touched it again. The most unpleasant side effect in my life. I overall just dislike it. So many reasons. If you're growing, it ruins your appetite. Colitis, right? It's a well-known thing. People get low appetite on trend. I overall hate trend. Some guys can get away with it and they like it for cutting. And yeah, me, I don't like it. It's very bad for me.
They get the low appetite because it has such a strong affinity for the androgen receptor that it's damaging the kidney. One of the subscribers to my channel right now has hepatocellular carcinoma. He has a cancer of the not the kidney, of the liver. Yeah. He has a liver cancer because of using Tren. He never used any orals. That's how androgenic it is. And I experienced the exact same thing you did. I was in my early 20s. I tried a very short cycle with a high-dosed real Tren, not the lab-made stuff. And immediately, I had never had any kind of hair loss. My hair shedded. I could see my scalp slightly. I was, what the hell is this? And I stopped and it came back, which is shocking. So it must have almost more affinity than DHTs. Or maybe it's converted into something else. I don't know. It's very complicated.
That quick, I was thinking it was more of like a telogen whatever, ethylib, the shock hair loss from the hormones. I feel like it had to have been because it was so quick and rapid, right?
But, yes, it was a week, yeah.
But it produced it in an androgenic pattern.
Yeah, I know.
All over, and it was that the widow's peak and everything else going the most. It was.
I know, it's horrible. So, final question. I wanted to ask you, are you into Sarms at all?
No, I get asked this a lot. No, I don't like them. People think I do because I like the less androgenic items. But personal experience, because like I said, I deal with lots of people with hair loss. And they want to try this and this and that. Almost every single SARM causes them hair loss. And I think majority of them are made from DHT derivatives. I'm not sure. I looked in a little bit, and it's just the sides. Many of them still shut you down. It's to me, it was just I'd rather use the real thing and get less side effects, basically. And I just stopped looking into them altogether.
Yeah, I'm not into them either. They're very misleading. Selective androgen receptor modulators. They're not. I'm sure they're not modulators. They're agonists of the androgen receptor that are they're just other steroids that are probably less effective and less understood, right?
Yeah,
I think so too. Well, Taeian, I really have to thank you for coming on because you cleared up a lot for us. And for those people that were trying to censor Taeian, I'm not censoring anyone on my channel. Anyone who wants to come on can come on. And even Victor, if he wants to come on, he can come on and explain his own. By the way, Victor, look, he has a YouTube channel. I've seen it. He seems like a nice guy on the channel, but this separate kind of trying to fight with people and censor people is not the way to go, for sure. And so Taeian, thank you so much for coming on. This video will come out in a couple of weeks. I'll send you an email before it does so you can tell people about it and all that. But I really appreciate it. Thank you. Where'd your beard go, by the way? I have a picture of you and it only has, do you have another picture I can use for the thumbnail?
Yeah, I'll send you a few different pictures. Yeah.
Send me a picture, yeah, because I just have a picture of you with this long beard. It disappeared. You surprised me when you came on today.
It's been gone for quite a while, actually, maybe almost a year, I think.
I used to have one like that too, but that thing, it gets in the way. You can't see your face sometimes. You can't see any expressions.
I did it because it was like I wanted to try it again. I was like, it's been because I had it for a few years. I was like, let's see. I forget what I look like. Yeah.
Exactly. You forget completely, and then when you shave it, you're like, wait, my face ends early. I didn't think it ended here. You thought it ended further.
The past few months, I keep debating, like, do I do this again or not? Or
I know exactly what you mean. All right, it's nice talking to you, Taeian. I really appreciate you coming on.
It was great meeting you.